Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MoAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose land we are located. With deep respect, MoAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, we reside on the unceded native lands and thank the Ramaytush and Chochenyo Ohlone peoples of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I welcome you this evening to the program series African Diaspora Film Club, occurring monthly with Cornelius Moore, who is co-director of the California Newsreel, the 53-year-old social issue nonprofit film distribution and production company. He's also an independent film curator specializing in works from and about the Black world. I also want to thank Black Public Media for co-sponsoring this series with us. Today, we're excited to discuss the documentary Ailey. If you haven't seen the film, it's streaming on PBS through Tuesday, February 8th, and it's also available on Hulu. We are thrilled to have joining us for the discussion today, director Jamila Wignot. Jamila Wignot is a Brooklyn-based documentary filmmaker. Her directing work includes the Peabody, Emmy, and NAACP award-winning series, The African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross, hosted by Henry Louis Gates. Town Hall, co-directed with Sierra Pettingill, a longitudinal portrait of Tea Party activists determined to unseat Barack Obama. And for PBS's American Experience series, the Peabody Award-winning Triangle Fire, and Emmy-nominated Walt Whitman. Jamila's producing credits include Sierra Pettingill's forthcoming feature documentary Riotsville Usa, W. Kamau Bell's Bring the Pain, and the narrative feature Astray. We'll start the discussion with Cornelius and Jamila, and we encourage everyone to participate by making comments and sharing reactions in the chat and submitting questions through the Q&A box. And finally, please take a moment to type in to the chat where you're joining us from. We love finding the diaspora in our audience. Thank you. I'll now turn it over to you, Cornelius and Jamila.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Welcome, Jamila.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
So great to be here. Thank you.
And for doing such a great film. And congratulations on the NAACP Image Award.
Thank you. It's amazing.
So people can still vote?
I think so. I hope so. I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
it really is like, it is one of those, I really am flattered to be recognized by them in this way. And the nomination means a great deal. So.
Okay. Well, I mean, your film, Ailey, works on so many levels. I mean, a portrait of a unique and complicated artist and the times in which he lived and the institution he built, the dance company, and also the exciting performances. So we learned so much about him, we learned about the company and the people who went through the company. So while I was watching, I was thinking that whoever made this, whoever was working on this, is somebody who appreciated the art of movement and dance, and so this probably was a dancer. So I'm sort of begin with that, and you can just say how you came to this project.
Sure. I love that question because it's flattering that I've made a film in which I have passed myself off as somebody with deep experience in the dance world. I love dancing. It's something I always have loved, but I am not formally trained and didn't have any formal training as a young person in any way. And I discovered the Ailey Company in college, actually. Of course, I've heard of them, but I'd never seen them in live performance. So I was able to go and, it just really, as I think everybody's sort of, original, the baptismal experience of seeing Ailey, let's call it that, it just really moved me so much. I felt, just totally taken in by this array of bodies on stage and the kinds of dance works they were performing, and this real kind of centering of a Black experience. This was in the 90s. So it felt like a time where there was a kind of a kind of, we were like peak colorblind society and nobody's seeing race anymore in the 90s. And here was a company who is still, you know, invested in exploring in a very specific way Black experience, but all obviously showing and revealing the universal themes that are a part of that. And so then fast forward all those many years later, when I was approached by Insignia Films, a production company in New York, who also are, you know, make a lot of public media works, and they were looking for a director for Ailey. And, you know, it was a kind of initial, you know, what do you think about this? Would you be interested? And it really felt like this film came to me. And I was, you know, so excited from the beginning to do that. And so this was in like 2016, 2017 that we initiated conversations about it.
Mm-hmm. And so how long was the whole process of from there to the completion?
Yeah, the whole process was about, I think it's 5 years. We approached the company in 2017 to see about getting access to do a biographical portrait of Ailey. And at that time, we also really wanted to explore some contemporary piece of the company because, you know, my feeling was that, you know, he really lives on beyond his death because his legacy is so powerful, because he built this platform where so many generations have been able to continue to explore their voice. And it didn't feel like it would do justice to his biography to just make it sort of birth to death. And we were just sort of like, you know, maybe there's a young dancer doing something, or maybe there's a sort of emergent choreographer. And Robert Battle, the head of the company, said, it's really strange that you're coming to me now, because I just commissioned Rennie Harris to do this hour-long ballet for our 60th anniversary. And is that something you guys think you might want to pursue? And you know, we were like, yeah, if Rennie will have us in his rehearsal room, absolutely. So that was actually the beginning of our production, was really that July through August, filming some of the days of his 5-week rehearsal process that started our production process. And then I was doing the really deep research, both to steep myself in the history of and world of dance, because even though I didn't think it was going to be a film that was going to get into that in a kind of expository, scholastic way, I wanted to feel like I was on solid ground, and to understand his place within that world. Yeah, so about 5 years, and we opened our edit in March 2020, and took about 10 months to complete the film.
Well, thank you for that, and also the segue into the question that I had, a comment about how you pretty much began the film with Rennie Harris, the rehearsals for the piece that they're doing. I thought it signaled something at where the film was going to go. So I like to hear some of the discussions about you and your team about why you positioned it that Rennie, the rehearsals in the very beginning.
Why we made the choice to start there.
Yeah.
I think because we knew we had this kind of, I mean, it is something that evolved in the edit. It was a little bit of a challenge, because we didn't want to have a kind of red herring. And throughout the edit of the red herring of starting a film with Rennie, and then people thinking it was going to be an Ailey story, is understood principally through this new rehearsal. And also what happened to us in the edit is that both Rennie and Ailey are incredibly, they're just wonderful, you know, brilliant men. And it was like we were in this love affair where we'd spend some time on Ailey's biography, and the balance of the story would tip, and we weren't sure kind of how we were going to get Rennie knit back in. And then we'd spend some time with Rennie, and the balance would tip to him. So there was this kind of back and forth that we were trying to figure out. I think we just felt like to hold off on the contemporary story just editorially wasn't kind of working. And once we figured out that we would open in the way that we did, which there are specific reasons in terms of a kind of bookending that happens with opening with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and then at the end of the film understanding really the kind of consequences of that success, you know, all that it required to return to that space. It felt like we needed to sort of be with Rennie and to sort of see him on a journey as well of understanding this figure and how he was going to translate that into movement language.
Because I think you probably know more about dance than me, but I do know the name Rennie Harris is connected with hip hop, and Ailey being more connected with modern dance. This is maybe a way to bring in an audience or a different audience to an appreciation of Ailey.
Yeah, absolutely. And the company choosing somebody like Rennie Harris is still very consistent with Ailey's original mission since the inception, that he was always going to stage dance works of, choreographic ancestors, let's say Catherine Denham, Pearl Primus, but that he always wanted his company to feature. It was a repertory company since the beginning, so they did dance ballet and they did do post modern, and they started when it was possible to incorporate street dance. He was very non-discriminating, let's say, in what he thought, because he wanted his audiences to have a kind of wide knowledge of dance, and it isn't a single language. So it was sort of in fitting with the overall vision as well.
So you indicated you had the cooperation of Robert Battle and therefore the company. So do you also have the I guess the cooperation of the estate?
Yeah, so the company is the estate now.
Okay.
And so we had their permission, but it was, I think for good reason, they are very protective of his legacy. And I think that it was something that in terms of, in documentary, we talk a lot about access and the way that you gain access. And in many ways, the kind of experience of working with the company was more akin to the way that I've worked on verite films, where the access in historical films, it can feel like you get the access of the estate and you just go off and make your film. And in verite films, you're always nursing or, supporting that access. You're always kind of engaged with your subjects. And I think with Ailey, it interestingly was more in that camp where they had no editorial control and they weren't seeing cuts as we were developing, but we were, I was having conversations with subjects long after I'd interviewed them and just kind of maintaining this connection, because I didn't want them to feel like it was extractive. Like, Gate, you gave him to me, now let me do whatever it is that I want to do. And, because they also have a substantial part of the archive, we also needed we just needed to make sure that they felt valued in the relationship, and that, it's so much about trust. And we had to earn that trust, which is one reason that the film taking as long as it did, I think, was really important, actually. It gave us a longer time to build a relationship. So
I feel like I'm trying to remember. I know I've seen the company once. I did unfortunately didn't see it while Alvin Ailey was alive, and on television. But I didn't realize that there were books. I learned about Ailey through your wonderful film, and subsequently, in preparing for this, I saw there's a book by Jennifer Dunning, and surprising me, a memoir.
Yeah.
That A. Peter Bailey was writing with Alvin Ailey.
Yeah.
So I'd like to talk about what the sources you relied on for the research for the film, and the tapes of his audio, which I was surprised at too.
Yes.
They came from Peter Bailey's.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, so I think I started with Jennifer Dunning's biography in terms of the Ailey specific research. I was reading other sort of dance theory books outside of it, again, just to ground myself in the practice. And then I started with Jennifer Dunning, and there was just these incredibly vivid passages that she has at the opening about his childhood. And then later in the book, there's these sort of direct quotes. And I knew she had interviewed him several times because she was a dance critic for the New York Times, but he had passed by the time she had started writing the biography. And so it gave me this great synthesis of understanding his biography and his experience in the world of dance. And because she's a dance critic, there was a kind of critical positioning as well. But it was like nagging at me, the level of kind of just fine detail that was in there. And later, I started digging through, like, where is she getting these quotes from? And I realized that there was this memoir, which I also didn't know about, and written by A. Peter Bailey. So I went to that book and I was like, oh my gosh, here it is. It's largely in his, it's told, it's all in his words. And I just was like, well, maybe we would cast a voice if the tapes don't exist. And so then we just started the process of, where are these tapes and do they exist? And it turned out that the Ailey company actually had them, but they hadn't granted, but they hadn't granted anyone access to them, because I think they are the sort of most open or the most private aspects of his life, to the degree that they come out in those tapes. And so we got access to those, and that was just, really just became this wonderful, that was the sort of bones and sinew and tissue of the whole film, that we knew we could tell the story in his own voice. And I think to hear him speaking to those experiences is just so much more powerful than, other people commenting on them. So it was really those two texts that formed the basis of understanding his biography. And then Thomas de France has written a book called Dancing Revelations. He's a dance scholar, and he really has done this incredible scholarship on Ailey's specific dances and what they mean. And we interviewed him and didn't end up including him in the film, but he was a huge resource for me when I finally sat down to watch the hours and hours and hours of dance performance recordings. I could have his scholarship to, again, not being a dancer, to kind of understand the movement principles of Ailey's dance work. So those three became the basis of the text. And then, sort of being able to use the audio recordings really freely to kind of create his story.
Yeah, it's so wonderful that you have those tapes and you can use them, and you use them appropriately and throughout. So because you have the connection with the dance company, you have the footage of the performances.
Yeah. And also then we also had access, they have recordings of all the performances, also the New York Public Library, the Performing Arts Library, an extraordinary collection. So I could look at the recordings there. And then thanks to largely our European friends, there are many dance performances that were filmed, really beautiful professional films made. Dance Mark has a huge collection, and then Italy, France, several of those countries where dance is a less struggling art than it is here. So we saw those through the company's collection and then licensed them from the actual copyright owners, which are the European companies.
So, I know enough that Revelations, that's a centerpiece, as well as Cry.
Yeah.
So they had to be in there. What were the discussions about some of the other performances?
Yeah, well, I should say Cry had to be in there. I think people would say, oh, Cry has to be in there, but Cry had to be in there because of me.
Okay.
I mean, that dance, there's just so much in that dance that I connect with. It makes me think about my mother, obviously, that thinks about, the experience of Black womanhood at large. And, it's who he dedicated the works to. So I really wanted to explore that as well. Masakela Langage was a dance work that, it really is considered his most political dance work. And I think there's a way in which, I think there's a kind of politics in all of his dance. I think in 1958, create a dance work set in a juke joint that's staging the lives of sort of everyday folk outside of the sort of oppressive forces, because they're in a black space, largely living out their truth, and to center that on the stage of modern dance. I think there is something quite political in that. But in Masakela, he really is kind of addressing both, the assassination of Fred Hampton and also, tensions in South Africa. Actually, it's actually a South African bar that the dance is staged in. So a commentary about apartheid. And, it's always talked about as his most political dance work, although in the contemporary performances of it, they don't have the ending that luckily exists in a performance rehearsal recording, where he actually confronts the audience and says, thank you very much, thank you very much, where he's kind of interrogating spectatorship. What does it mean for you, the audience, to come here to watch these people dance their lives? And is it something you carry with you out on the streets when you leave, this auditorium? Like, what are you consuming? And when we found that, yeah, I was already planning on including the dance, but it felt just so important to hear him connect his dances to very political moments that frustrated him and enraged him. You can see in that interview, I'm a Black man, I'm still living in this. And it's like, he's saying that he's somebody born in 31 and now it's 69, it's just that sense that nothing changes. And then Memoria, was our way into seeing this kind of anguish around the loss of this friend and, his own kind of slipping into wrestling with his mortality, the lack of any kind of life outside of the dance world that he had built for himself. And of course, also his mental health struggles, which he had had. So there just became dance works that felt that we could sort of tie more of his biography to them thematically.
So he's a very public person because of the performance and, it's larger than life, the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, but also a very private person. So you had a challenge of trying to balance all those things in this film. So I'd like you to talk about that, but I also want curious, the people who loved him and who were around him they had their own, I guess, way of dealing with him being a private person. And so was that ever a challenge for you to have people, reveal and talk about his private life, or people kind of protective?
I think a mix of both, because as I said, the film took quite a long time to get off the ground. All the time that I was doing the rehearsal process with Rennie, filming that, I was having lunches with everybody who appears on camera. I would meet them and sit with them for several hours, and I would call them up again. So I was developing a relationship with them, and there was, even in those kind of early pre-interviews, there was hesitancy. It was sort of like a peeling back of the onion a bit in each of those conversations as we developed, some sort of trust and bond. I think he is frustratingly private in the sense that I truly think that people are protective, and they also don't know as much as you might imagine they would know for a person who they were around all the time. In terms of, say, his sexuality, he was out publicly to everybody around him. Everybody knew he was gay. They had met some of his, partners that were not all that long lasting. And it was just kind of, we had an interview with Carmen DeLavalade who said, we didn't include in the film because she just said, like, who cares? Everybody was gay. I mean, it was a non-issue. But of course, it wasn't an identity that he could claim publicly then as, I'm Alvin Ailey, the queer Black, choreographer who X, Y, and Z. And so that was frustrating. What surprised me was time and again how much people really were at a remove. He was very expert at making people who dance for him feel seen while not allowing them to really see him. And then I think when we interviewed Mazazumi Chaya, his associate art director, and he shares that anecdote of that one time that, Ailey wanted him to come up to his apartment to talk, and he didn't take the invitation because he wanted to keep him on the pedestal. And so there is this way in which his unwillingness to be open became something that I think even his collaborators grew comfortable with. I think there was a side of him that they didn't want to see, that they didn't want to manage. I'm not sure. I don't think they wanted to see him as a man in the end, so that was difficult. I will say we did actually interview one of his partners his romantic partners who in the end decided that he just didn't want to be on camera. And yet
Wait, he didn't want to be on camera, but he'd been interviewed audio wise?
No, he didn't want to participate at all.
Oh.
But I met with him, spoke with him, I still text with him. But yeah, he just wasn't interested in participate. It was in a very early time in Ailey's life. They were together for quite a bit of time, but he just kept feeling like if somebody were doing a biography about you and your college boyfriend showed up, like, would that feel right? You know, it just, there was some way in which he just felt like their relationship was so early. And even with him, there were things that he felt like he also still was kept at an arm's length from Ailey, you know, so there's something there. And I think in a biography, you know, for me, it was frustrating. I wanted to know more. Could I get more?
Mhm.
And in the end, I think what we decided was the absence was what we could highlight in the film. And, you know, I sort of leave it up to everyone to come to their own, not to come to their own conclusions, but to maybe try to relate to him a bit more and think about what are the things that would make me want to withhold and, you know, what could explain these kinds of absences, but we don't. And I also didn't want to, I think sometimes in making documentaries, you feel a burden to kind of make the decision about, or, you know, to say, oh, well, it's because his relationship with his mother, or it's because he grew up poor, or it's because he was queer, or it's because these things. And I just felt like it's not my job to, there wasn't anything in the tapes that he had, his audio interviews, that revealed that. And it doesn't feel like I can name the issue that informs this thing. So again, the absence is what spoke the loudest. And that's where we had, but yes, it's very frustrating. If if he were still alive, I would be nudgier than the people that were in his life at the time.
Well, one of the questions came in about saying documentaries seem to me to be a line between history and story, and based in facts but structured as a narrative. Do you feel that the doc has changed, reshaped that Ailey narrative, or revealed a full vision of his life work? Well,
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And we certainly approached it with that in mind, kind of wanting to create an immersive experience that put the viewer in his body, really, as he, you know, went on his journey of becoming, is sort of how I always considered it. I hope that what it does is reveal a sense of how much it took. I think now, with the company being as successful it is, and people really forgetting, other than he's a poster on a wall or the name of the company, it's like, that's the founder, but people don't maybe think so much about and how an institution like this continued to survive. And also, I think why the individuals who decided to carry the legacy on have committed themselves to this organization in the way that they did, which I think is about him. But for me, seeing, you know, his drive, his passion, his fragility, his vulnerability, the things he wasn't able to build for himself in his own life, I hope that gives a fuller portrait. It's easy to see him as the kind of icon on a pedestal, but I think because of who he was able to create the works that he did.
well, and there's also, I mean, back to his, you know, his privacy in his life, and I mean, there's a different time that he inhabited a different time than the audience is watching the film. So
Yeah,
the words and terminology were different, and they didn't necessarily exist.
right,
So
exactly. Yeah, although, you know, it's interesting too, because that's another layer to it. And it's, you know, something that, you know, you and I, we know each other from the Lorraine Hansberry documentary, but it's same thing with Lorraine Hansberry, who was, you know, a lesbian, you know, lived a life as a lesbian, but no, you know, wasn't public about it. And there is this question of, you know, well, how much am I entitled to know about somebody who is a private figure, or what kind of privacy are public figures allowed? And I think when they're not alive anymore, there's the sense that I should be in Ailey's, you know, underwear drawer. And I don't know, like, how much more does that reveal about him as an artist, you know? And I also think there's a way in which that is only applied to the histories of people who are gay, you know, who are queer, in the way that I don't think people are as like obsessively wanting to know what straight artists, you know. So those were all things that I was thinking about as well. But yeah, I don't think, you know, we live in a time now where everybody lives their lives out loud in public. So I don't know.
and everything.
Yeah, I'm in people's underwear drawers. They're literally like, here you go. So anyway, it's just something that we very much thought about in the making of the film.
Well, Bill T. Jones is, I think, the only person who kind of comments about that. I mean, even as far as saying, you know, he was wondering if Ailey was suffering from imposter syndrome, and also, you know, because like, well, Bill T. Jones, so much of his work is about his life and also about dealing with HIV, that and being HIV positive, that Ailey did not reveal that about himself, and so he had something to say about that, but other people kind of didn't seem to in the film, or
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah. I mean, it's again, I think a question of point of view where, Ms. Jameson makes clear that, at that point in time, it wasn't something that by and large, 1989, that, people were talking about very openly. And I absolutely remember that, the extraordinary shame and stigma that was there. And, Bill T. Jones and his partner, Ernie Zane, were really on the forefront of a wave of a community that was actually sort of tackling this head on. But I thought Bill T. Jones' critique, let's call it that, or what he offers in that moment, was so important. I mean, he did choose to edit it out. And we can think about what it means for, someone who came of age in the times that Ailey did to make that choice. And it was funny, when I sat down to interview Bill T. Jones, the first thing he asked me, before we really had started rolling cameras, was, "Hey, can you tell me again when Alvin Ailey was," or he calls him Alvin, "when Alvin was born?" I said, 1931. And he said, "Oh my gosh, he was my father's age." And it's like, in that moment, I think we both understood something about, okay, so what does that mean about the different ways that you both navigated the world? Ailey's a product of, he comes of age at the very beginning of the civil rights movement, and obviously Bill T. Jones is coming of age in a different time. But it's interesting because right before we started the project, I actually they were doing this wonderful retrospective of Marlon Riggs's works. And one of his films, No Regrets, which was for the Disclosure Project, ends with this incredible sort of credit roll, let's call it, where he names all the kind of foremost African American, really, individuals who were HIV positive who didn't disclose, and he put Alvin Ailey's name up there. And I just thought, that was, I think, in the mid 90s that film was made, and there is that there. I think there's something to wrestle with. I think.
Yeah, that was 92, I think.
Yeah.
91, 92. So yeah.
Yeah. So the frustration, he didn't disclose, but he dies of a rare blood disorder in 1989. I mean, there was something in there that I think anybody at that time would have known exactly what that meant. So yeah, I think we just wanted to, I think that critique was important, but also there was a kind of kindness that I think Bill T. Jones offered, or a kind of context, right, of, how much was really at stake. Would the Ailey company have survived, given the kinds of donors they required, and the sort of level of, in the I guess in the world that it was in, were those people going to be willing to continue to support a company that now the founder was HIV positive or had died of AIDS related complications? I mean, in 1989, I don't think so, which is why we show Ronald Reagan. It's like he's accepting his Medal of Freedom from a president who is waging a war, really, against a community of people suffering from this illness. So, the irony, or whatever you want to call it, is, the tragedy really is in the footage.
Thank you for mentioning that. I noted down that he was having to deal with Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan up there in the balcony, and what that must have been like to have people who thought they were being I guess nice, but really hostile.
Right.
So, to us, all of us. I want to talk to you about your use of the archival footage, which I thought was wonderful and incredible, where which I think transports you to an earlier time when Alvin Ailey was growing up, and I felt like that I was there. That this was footage about his life and from his family, but new, also another level, probably not. So please talk to us about how you worked with that, how you discovered these archival footage and their use in the film.
Yeah, so it was a long process of just doing that research and looking for stuff. I worked with a wonderful archival producer named Rebecca Kent. And once we sort of figured out that we were going to have, we were going to be able to kind of root the film in Ailey's own words, you know, the lift in terms of visuals becomes higher, because what are we seeing while he's talking? And I think we just really started to hone in on a couple things. One was, as I said, you know, this idea of being in point of view, of really trying to experience the world the way that he experienced it. So knowing that he is born in 1931 and raised by a single mother who's obviously has this, you know, this life of, you know, going from place to place in search of work. We knew there wasn't going to be any home movie footage, but we wanted to have that kind of texture and feel to it. We wanted it to not feel, you know, super, like the images wouldn't be super, you know, sort of pristine, because we wanted a kind of impressionistic feel to that. And so we just started asking archives to send us that material. And there's an interesting thing with both how footage of Black life was shot, particularly in the 30s and 40s. There are filmmakers who are down there making films that's, I don't know, maybe the axis is, there's just something in the framing where some footage feels like it could be through the eyes of an African-American filmmaker. And in some instances, the footage that we used footage of Zora Neale Hurston's field studies in some parts of the film, Catherine Dunham's work. And then there's other sort of like ethnographic stuff that just becomes very, that doesn't work for the film. And then Ailey's own notion of blood memories, this kind of ancestral, this idea of a kind of ancestral memory that's passed down, meant that we felt really freed not to sort of stay in period. So that helped us that, you know, when we're talking about the juke joint, we were actually maybe seeing a Black family in the 1950s dancing in their living room, or, you know, a picnic that's happening. And so that was sort of the way that we worked it. And there are several. Duke University has an amazing archive. The Smithsonian has an amazing archive. Chicago Historical Museum, Texas Archive of Moving Images. Those became our kind of base archives that we worked with. And I think, as I was saying to you before we started the interview, you know, I really think in the last 10 years, there's been this effort of not just preserving these materials, but digitizing them. So access to them is so much easier. So you could reach out to an archival, you know, or an archivist working at one of these archives, and they can get you material that they have in a way that that just wasn't really possible before.
Someone put in the chat about watching a film on Carmen de la Vlade and Jeffrey Holder, and they, well, Carmen de la Vlade is throughout their film because she knew Alvin Ailey when they were in high school.
Yeah. Yeah, she's the reason that he ended up dancing at Lester Horton. Yeah.
And there's the sweep of her and you know, other people who you know, were very important dance figures in Black dance that are in the film. So I mean, it encourages me to, and maybe other people to also go and look and find out more about, you know, their role in dance, but also, you know, Black history and the like.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Jeffrey Holder had passed by the time you were working on the film?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And Carmen, we were able to interview for the film. And she certainly has, you know, things that she knows about their high school years, but actually she left Ailey's company after the Southeast Asia tour that they did. And she then went and danced for many other organizations. They remained friends, but they weren't spending that much time together. And so she didn't, you know, with me, there wasn't much she had that she was offering of sort of concrete ideas about, you know, what was happening. I mean, she, in our interview, was sort of often saying that it was sort of speculation that she had. So, and, you know, we just wanted, we also were balancing, you know, having Alvin tell his own story in his own words, right? So there were things she could tell us about his childhood and his experience at the Horton Company, but we allowed him to do that work for us.
Mhm, mhm. And Catherine Dunham and her role in him and the relationship that they had. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we just wanted, to show what a kind of source of inspiration it was. And I guess the ways that, representation mattered even then, so he's somebody who's, completely enamored of the dance world, but he's not, as he said, he's not seeing people really who look like himself. He's seeing people in clubs, in South Central LA, which is where he's from. But in terms of kind of theatrical dance, he hasn't seen that until this one day he happens to walk in to a theater, sees the poster and goes in and is just, has a moment of awareness that, oh, maybe it is possible. Because I'm seeing this dance work that also resonates with me in terms of, her dance works are rooted in her anthropological work. So there's something very grounded in something very specific in terms of cultural practice and social dance that she's centering her dance works on. And what I love about it is that then you see that for everyone who will dance for him that is a participant in our film, they all have the exact same experience of seeing him, and it becomes, which I found incredible, across the board, it was the animating force that made them want to pursue a life of dance, particularly George Faison, who I think has kind of the most, that it really was in seeing the Ailey Company that he realized as a Black boy from DC, he could move to New York and pursue a life of dance. And then I didn't pursue a life of dance, but I think that's the thing about the seeing the Ailey Company for the first time. There is just like a kind of opening that it creates for you. And I loved that for Mr. Ailey, that starts with Catherine Dunham and continues with Lester Horton, his dance instructor. So.
Mm-hmm. So, and I leafed through some of the books and saw that there were tours outside the US and Europe, and also Africa and the South America. So was there ever any footage of any of those that you came across?
Yeah, so there's footage in our film. It's a lot of it was shot by USAID because there were State Department tours. So the footage that you see of Ailey actually performing with Carmen de Lavalade in a short section of Wade in the Water when the company's overseas, all of that is footage that was filmed as part of their Southeast Asia tour of 62. So I think there's footage of them in Japan and South Asia as well. And I think it might have been in Malaysia was one of the pieces of footage. And then later when you see, there's a great piece of footage of Judith Jamison just like dancing at a party. That's footage of them when they were in Senegal on tour there in 66. And then, yeah, I mean, there's the company has been a touring company since 62. So there is a lot of footage, across the globe of them performing.
Thank you. So let's hear about some of the reactions you've gotten to the film. And well, first of all, from the company and then people who were close to Alvin Ailey.
Yeah, the reactions from the company were, the best I could ask for because they didn't see a cut of the film until we were done. And it was sort of handing them over, we had said you could, there's trust and we'd been maintaining this relationship with them, but now they would see what we pulled together. And very emotional reactions from some of them who were now sitting with him and sitting with his voice again in a way that they hadn't in many, since he passed. I think you see even in the film when Rennie Harris uses, Ailey's voice and we cut to Judith Jamison when his voice is no longer, and she has that very emotional reaction. So she had a very emotional reaction. Some, I'm not going to name any names, but, some people were they think the film is beautiful, but they also feel like, knowing that he was such a private person, there's things in there that even they kind of, they're still having that tension of, you know, I knew him and I worked with him, but I knew he was also private. And so I wanted to respect that, and how, you know, in ways that this film kind of opens up a window into things that weren't publicly known or just weren't, you know, discussed at the time. But over, you know, across the board, the company, you know, has received the film very well. And then I will say, you know, some of the best moments were at the theatrical screenings that we had in New York, where there were at least 3 or 4 people who came up to me who had worked with the company in some capacity in the sort of mid 70s. And they all felt like this was who, that the film captured a very good sense of, you know, who he was. And the one partner that I was able to connect with also sent me a very lovely text saying, thank you. I feel that you were really swimming in his skin, and this is, it felt true to the person that he felt he knew, which was, you know, really deeply moving and profound. So I was grateful for that. It's been mostly really wonderful. You know, I think the frustrating parts are this absence that, you know, I think there are people who just, you know, the film just couldn't really go beyond that in the ways that we built it, in terms of leaning in on Mr. Ailey's voice and sort of keeping to the cast that we did. So there's been some of that criticism, but, you know, I feel like it's not a film for the uninitiated in a way. Like, I'm asking you to sort of sit here and allow a documentary to not have to be a book with moving pictures or, you know, do all those things. I really was interested in an experience and a sense of getting close to somebody, and to understanding him, you know, as an artist who was very much on this journey, and to experience that alongside him, or as close to him as we could possibly be.
Well, I love the way you end the film with the very exuberant dancing number, but also Judith Jameson's comment about being with Ailey when he was passing, and that he breathed out instead of in, and that we, his colleagues and the people who want to honor and continue his legacy, are to breathe out. So I would imagine that dance companies or people who are in the world of dance would see this film as an inspiration.
Yeah, that's been a huge part of it too. I feel like the dance audiences really, you know, understand it almost as a kind of dance piece. We've gotten that comment, which I want to give credit to my editor, Annika Lilia, who's just extraordinary, that it has a kind of movement quality to it, which has been great. And yeah, I mean, that moment with Miss Jameson was, you know, it doesn't happen all the time, but every once in a while in an interview, you just know, yes, that's going to be a piece of dialogue that we will include in this film. And I was in, you know, when she said that, you know, my entire crew, everybody was sort of, she laughed, but, you know, we were crying because it's just such a beautiful story that she tells. And it does feel really true. I mean, if you haven't had a chance to walk into the Ailey building, the new building, even that's, you know, in Midtown, it has this kind of energy about it. And I'm not one of those like woojie people, moojie people. I just really do think there's something that they're actively engaged in. It is a practice that is about creating space, you know, giving people voice, having young people come in, be inspired, try to, you know, not all of them will maybe go on to be professional dancers, but, you know, connecting with the arts. And I think because of all of that, there's just a kind of generosity and joyfulness and spirit to the place. So, yeah.
So one question came in about how did the film become part of American Masters, and also connected to that, where is the film available outside of the PBS streaming and broadcast?
Yes, thank you. It became a part of American Masters because they were one of the kind of earliest supporters for us. It was an interesting film where we were getting both like, oh, a film about Alvin Ailey, no brainer. And then we weren't being able to find the resources to make these films. And American Masters just, really understood his place. And we felt really committed to the idea of having it be on public media because of Alvin Ailey's, real commitment to accessibility of the arts. It's something that was always very important to him. He has this quote that everybody says all the time, but, dance came from the people and it should be delivered back to the people. And it felt like this was the right home for it. And then we just hoped that we would be able to have also a theatrical and streaming. So we do, gratefully. And so it's on PBS through February 8th, I think is the date. And if you can't see it there, free streaming, it is also available on Hulu. So it's available on Hulu now, and we'll live there for those folks who have a Hulu subscription. So that's the way to see it.
Is there something else you want to say about the experience of working on this film and being connected to this world of artists, dancers?
Yeah, I hope I'm working on a series right now about music, and it's been great. And I just hope that, I hope it's not the only experience I have like it. It just really was a labor of love. I feel so grateful to have been able to spend time with him and with his story, and to meet all the dancers that I've been able to meet, and to spend time with those figures. It just really, it has been life-changing. And I feel, kind of kinship with him, or, kinship with sort of the struggle and that idea of creation being this lonely place. Like I really identify with that. And I also feel like, there's a kind of lesson learned about the importance of kind of being vulnerable and building community, which is something that I feel like was so much harder in his day than it is in mine. And so I'm grateful to have him be a kind of ancestor in that way. I just, it's really been just an extraordinary experience. So all I keep saying is like, I hope it's not the only one that feels this way. And I hope everyone can go out. I hope you'll see the film, and also the Ailey Company will be coming to Berkeley to perform as they do. And Lazarus is in the touring rep as well. So you'll have a chance to see Lazarus, which is
great.
Our film does one thing with it, but as a dance in and of itself, it is truly, it's revelations, I would say, in a kind of new form. Just really spectacular dance work.
So Jamila, can you tell us about the project you're working on?
It's not announced yet, so I can't say, but it's a 6-part documentary series. That's a music documentary series. So
something for us to look forward to.
Something to look forward to. Yes.
Right.
We're in the thick of it, but.
Oh, and you're doing that now. I was curious what other projects you had.
Yeah. So this is kind of 6 parts is my main game. But I have actually another film that I produced that was mentioned in the bio that actually premiered at this Sundance, called Riotsville USA, which is a look at effectively the state's increased militarization of the police force as something that was born of the rebellions of the late 60s. So it's a kind of examination of the state and media and kind of burgeoning militarization of the police. So that we haven't found a distributor for yet. We are actively working on that. And hopefully folks will get a chance to see that, because it's I was a producer on it, but it's a pretty incredible and I think new look at that era.
So it takes a look at the history of the development, or it's looking particularly what's happening in the last few years? No,
it's looking at basically 67 to 69. And it looks at these state, these basically sets that the government constructed. It was kind of the one policy that emerged out of the Kerner Commission, which was the famous commission that sort of toured urban areas in the wake of the rebellions to try to figure out what was the root cause of all of this? And they, to everyone's surprise, a kind of moderate group of politicians realized it was, racism, and that, sort of we were headed towards being, two countries, one white, one black, with our institutions being, deeply rooted in white supremacist practices. And then ironically, not many of their policy prescriptions were put into practice, except this one, which was a kind of civil disorder, civil disobedience training. So they built these fake inner city sets on army bases in the South, and the military police split into two groups, half of them playing military police, the other half playing a broad swath of counterculture figures, yippies, Black Panthers, and they reenacted these simulations of rebellions that, with tanks and helicopters and tear gas and many methods of, state sanctioned violence, basically, to suppress uprisings. And the film kind of makes the case that this is one of the seeds that leads to sort of where we are today. So
I don't know. I'm looking at my face. I'm like,
yeah,
you can't make that stuff up.
Yeah, no, you can't. It's, these Riotsville sets, that's what they were called, Riotsvilles. And they're pretty extraordinary. And then basically looking at, the way the media was sort of covering these things. And then the film ends with the Republican National Convention of '68, which a rebellion also happened in Liberty City at that time, that obviously has been, in terms of our retellings, totally eclipsed by the DNC of '68. And the film kind of makes the argument that we're actually living in the wake of what happened at the Republican National Convention. So law and order reigns supreme, and that's where we find ourselves today, right? So yeah, it's a essay film and all archival, and my hats are off to my director and the writer on that one, but something to look forward to as well.
Well, certainly hope it gets this distribution and broadcast and cable and everything. Great. Oh, I'm going to end on this, read it out loud from Marilyn. I long hoped for a documentary about Alvin Ailey. This film exceeds what I ever dreamed of. The fluid integration of the company in action, as well as segments about his mother, were really helpful in rounding out the picture of this genius. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I echo that from Marilyn. And thank you very much, Jamila.
Thank
for
you.
joining us and for your information and background about the film.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and great luck in this series that you're working on. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. This
Thank
was
you.
a really lovely conversation, and Jamila, your just affection for the subject matter really comes through in the film. It's beautiful. So thank you, and thank you all for joining us today. I do want to let everybody know that the African Diaspora Film Club will feature the film Fannie Lou Hamer's America, the story of the remarkable life of a fearless Mississippi sharecropper turned human rights activist. The film will stream on PBS and the World Channel beginning February 22nd, and we will have Monica Land, Fannie Lou Hamer's niece and executive producer of the film, in conversation with us next month on Sunday, March 13th. So please join us. I put the link to register for that program in the chat. I also want to remind people that MoAD is open. If you're local or traveling to the Bay Area, please come and see us. We have 5 stunning exhibitions on view through February 27th. I also put a link to a survey in the chat. If you have a few moments to give us your feedback, we'd love to hear what you thought about this program. It's really helpful for us. And also the obligatory, if you would like to support MoAD, we're always welcoming donations of any size. So you can go to our website, moadsf.org, or you can text 56512 and type the word MoAD SF and then follow the link to donate. And lastly, I would like to thank Black Public Media again for co-sponsoring this program. We love partnering with you and look forward to more conversations like this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everybody.
Good night.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.